going to talk about Russia. This is kind of a weird section of notes for us in geography because Russia is not in Europe. I mean, it is in Europe, but it's also in Asia. And so it's really weird because it's like we do Asia in geography B and we do Europe in geography A. So technically, Russia should be happening in between both trimesters. We decided to throw it in at the end of geography A, and we talk about Russia as a part of Europe. So Russia is a really interesting place because it's on two continents. So this blue part is the part that is in Europe, and then you have the Ural Mountains right here. And remember, they form the natural border or barrier between Europe and Asia. So then all the red is in Asia. So the population patterns. So there's 144 million people in Russia, and which is crazy because it's the largest country by land size. Like if you look at it on a map, it appears to be the largest country. But they have a population that's about half the size of the United States. So when you divide up their land area, their population by their land area, their population density is 22 people per square mile. So it's a really small population density. 80% of their population live on the European side. So Russia is considered to be more a part of Europe because that's where a majority of their population lives, and it's where their largest cities are at. We're going to talk about it in the next slide or so here, but as to why no one lives in the Asian part of Russia. And the reason for that is because the eastern part of Russia is called Siberia, and it makes up 75% of Russia's landmass. But the problem is that it looks like this year round. It's literally tundra. I mean, it's just frozen solid ice. They have long, harsh winters, very, very cold. I mean, the average temperature there is well below freezing year round. And Russia has historically used Siberia for prisons and labor camps. They make the perfect place to build a prison, like a high security prison where you put the country's worst criminals or whatever in there. And the reason for that is because they don't have to use as many guards. And you're like, why? If they're like really high risk prisoners, then why would they put them in a low security prison? Because it's in Siberia. I mean, there's no roads, there's no towns, there's no nothing. If they break out of the prison, what are they going to do? Hijack a car in the middle of the tundra right here and drive through all the roads and make it to wherever they're trying to go? I mean, they're going to run out of gas. They're going to run. I mean, there's nothing. There's nowhere to hide. There's no anything. So they use it for prisons and labor camps. It's very, very cold. And this is what it looks like. It almost looks like it's not even on planet Earth, but it is. It's in Russia. And in Russia, they refer to this as gulag. The prisons that are in Siberia, they call them gulag. You may have seen like memes about it before, but yeah, gulag. Okay, so the urban areas, 75% of their population lives in cities. So remember, 80% lives in Europe, 75 or three-quarters of that live in cities. So they live in like Moscow. This is the largest city in Russia. St. Petersburg, which used to be the old capital of Russia. Then they made it Moscow. But these two cities are amongst the biggest in Russia. If you break it down, these two cities have over 50% of Russia's population in it. So they're like the two predominant cities. Okay, so history. Russia, we're kind of going back to its early history, but we're skipping out the part where they talk about the Mongols and all that. But so their history, after medieval times and such, they became city-states, and they were ruled by princes. So they were like royalty. There was a king and a queen or a czar, and they had their children run different parts of the country. They were invaded and conquered by the Mongols. The Mongols were a nomadic group of warriors that traveled all throughout Russia, Asia, and parts of Europe. They like Genghis Khan. I'm sure you've heard of Genghis Khan before. He was a Mongol, and they rode on horses across Europe and Asia, and they just essentially raped and pillaged different towns and cities. They weren't religious people, so they would go in and raid churches because churches had money and gold and valuables. And so they would go in and take everything of value, and then they would burn it down to the ground, kill everyone that was there. They would kidnap, men, make them slaves. They would kidnap women and use them and then dispose of them like they were just an object. The Mongols were ruthless warriors that would go and do all kinds of larceny throughout the world, essentially. Eventually, what happens is that the people of Russia grow upset with the Mongols being able to just, come in and destroy their towns and cities. So what ends up happening is one of the princes says, you know what, if we didn't have city states, if we were all united as one thing, we could make a plan to be able to hold off the Mongols. This prince, he was known as Peter the Great. He modernizes and westernizes Russia. So what he does is he adopts things that they're doing in the United Kingdom and France and Germany, and he says like, hey, we're going to have these laws. I'm going to be the leader of the whole country. I'm going to promote people to rule in these areas. They're going to report to me. We're going to have a national military, and we're going to expand the country, and we're going to develop trade so that way we can have all different types of valuables. So Peter the Great, he adopts like Western attire, like the way they dress. They ditch a lot of their old traditions and they look to Europe to kind of become more like them and be a part of Europe. So this is why Peter was called Peter the Great. So a part of his idea was this idea of Russification, which if you look at that word, it just means like Russifying someone, right? Making them Russian. So as they expanded their empire, because they did, I mean, Russia was like right here and it expanded this way. And as they did this, they forced the people in those areas to assimilate into Russian culture. So they required them to speak Russian. They said you have to learn Russian or you can't be a Russian citizen. They also said you have to convert from whatever religion you are, you have to convert to Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And if you don't, then you can't be Russian. And so in Russia today, a large majority of their population, like 99.9% of their population, speaks Russian and practices Russian Orthodoxy or Eastern Orthodox Christianity. So this Russification process became very important to Russia because it made them who they are. And if you look at their country today, not just like medieval times or during the colonial period, if you look at them right now, they're very much very similar to what they were back then. It's very similar. Their culture is the same. They also built the Trans-Siberian Railroad in the 1800s. So this is a railroad that went from Moscow all the way across to this town, which I can't, Vladivostok. I can't say, I'm not Russian. But this is where the Trans-Siberian Railroad goes. It's pretty remarkable. It's 6,000 miles long. To give you an idea of that, that is going across the United States and back, like driving from New York to California and then back. So it's pretty long. It's a super long railroad. And this railroad was super important in the 1800s. It unites Russia and it gives people the ability to go from Moscow to Perm or from Moscow to Stalingrad or from Stalingrad to Omsk. And they could travel to the different parts of Russia very quickly, a lot more quickly than horseback or whatever. And so it becomes a very important part for their economy as well as the culture of their country. Something to be proud of. Hey, we built this railroad. It's the longest railroad in the world. Isn't that cool? Okay, so the revolution. So I don't want to go into too much detail about it. I mean, I think you'll learn more about it when you take U.S. history and you guys talk about the Cold War and stuff. But in Russia, there was protests that broke out in Russia in response to World War One. Just to give you a backdrop on World War One, Russia was allies with Germany in World War One. And World War Two, Russia was allies with the United States fighting against Germany. But in World War One, Russia was allies with Germany. And a part of being allies with Germany, they said that they wanted Poland, the country Poland. They wanted to be able to acquire that land. And Germany said, yeah, that's cool. Like, you can have Poland. If you help us out, we'll let you have Poland. And then Germany invades Poland, and Germany takes Poland. And so the people in Russia were upset at the way they were treated by Germany. They felt that they were being kind of ripped off. And what ends up happening is the people that are protesting it were calling for a new government. So in 1917, they have what was called the Bolshevik Revolution. And this was a revolution, like a literal civil war revolution, where you had protesters that became armed. They were armed with the ideas of communism. and they literally go to the mansion that the royalty, the czar, lived in, and they killed the entire royal family. They like all of them. They killed like the king, the queen, their kids, their everyone. The whole royal family gets killed um, during the Bolshevik Revolution, and so there was no heirs to say, "Hey, the royalty could continue." So what happens is this guy, his name is Vladimir Lenin, he becomes the leader, and because he was the leader of the protest movement, and they officially become communist, and they form what is called the USSR, or the United Soviet States Republic, and they become known as the Soviet Union in 1922. So 5 years later, they become the Soviet Union. So Vladimir Lenin was the leader, and in communism, we're talking like they control every aspect of life. There's no private property. You can't start your own business. You go to the store, they have one type of thing. You kind of saw that in the video that we watched the other day with Vlade when he talked about, in the Yugoslavia, you'd go to the store and you wanted chocolate. There's one type. You got the chocolate. There was one type of chocolate. But in the United States, there was like a million different types of chocolate, right? That's what it was in the Soviet Union. They had one type of deodorant. They had one type of toothpaste. They had one type of cereal. You just got what they had. You either got it or you didn't get it. And that's the way it worked. So when Vladimir Lenin dies, Joseph Stalin becomes the next leader. This is him here. And this guy is one of the brutal leaders in the history of the world. During World War II, he's the dictator in the Soviet Union during World War II. And Stalin was brutal. I mean, he had a no retreat policy for the military. So, like, in a battle, like if you're fighting or whatever and you're getting overwhelmed and you're losing, you'll retreat. You'll retreat, like you'll go backwards and go back to your line of defense. You'll kind of like concede that area you're fighting in and just give it to the enemy, and you'll try again another day. Well, Stalin had no retreat orders, and what would happen is if his troops in the battlefield started to retreat to go back to the line of defense, he ordered the generals that oversaw those troops to shoot and kill the troops that were retreating. So he would kill his own military, his own citizens, his own people. And it's estimated that Joseph Stalin killed, estimated, this is just an estimate, about 21 million Soviet citizens during his tenure as the leader of the Soviet Union. So the guy was ruthless, absolutely brutal. So after World War II, the Soviet Union is, on the up and up. Like during World War II, the Soviet Union was a super powerful force in the world. They were allies with the United States. The United States we were kicking Germany's butt from the West. The Soviet Union was really kicking Germany's butt from the East. And if you do the math on it, the number of Nazi troops the United States killed in comparison to the Soviet Union, it's 19 to 1. The Soviet Union killed 19 Nazis for every one Nazi the United States killed. The Soviet Union was doing all the heavy lifting during World War II in Europe. They were doing all the heavy lifting, and everyone saw that. And after World War II ended, we partitioned Germany. And so United Kingdom, France, England, and the Soviet Union were supposed to split up Germany into four pieces and rebuild that area. Well, the Soviet Union made a deal with France to get their parts. So Soviet Union had two of the four partitioned areas of Germany, and Soviet Union just started building East Germany like it was in the Soviet Union. And they actually said, it's ours now. It's not Germany, it's us. It's a part of the Soviet Union. And this starts the Cold War. So it starts this political war with the United States, where we weren't fighting an actual war. Like we weren't shooting bullets at one another. We weren't flying, dropping bombs on one another, but it was a political war. It was a war of ideas. It was capitalism and democracy versus communism. And so what ends up happening is we essentially we try to like outdo one another. We're like flexing on one another super hard. So like the Soviet Union would be like, hey, we made this missile and it can go into space. And we're like, oh yeah? Well, our missile can fly in space. And they'd be like, yeah, well, we built this plane and it can go this fast. I'm like, oh yeah, well, we built this plane and it can go this fast. And we were just like flexing on one another. And at the time, the president of the United States was Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, his plan was we have more money than they do, so we can flex harder than they can. So we're just going to keep flexing and flexing and flexing and flexing until they run out of money. And then they'll have to just collapse because they ran out of money. And this is what happened. And that's exactly what happened. a space race, right? The Soviet Union's like, we're going to put a man in space. So they did. They were the first country to make a rocket ship and go into space. And we're like, well, we're going to go and fly around the Earth in space. And then they're like, well, we're going to go land on the moon. And we're like, no, 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 no. We're going to land on the moon. And it was a race to see who could do it. We did it first. And I mean, that stuff cost a huge amount of money. So the Cold War weakened the Soviet Union's role in the world because everyone was looking at them like, ooh, they can't quite keep up with the United States. So eventually what happens is Gorbachev he becomes the leader of the Soviet Union, and he realizes that things are not going good for the Soviet Union, and he implements these policies called perestroika and glasnost. And essentially what it was is he wanted to open up the country to free market. He wanted to have a free market capitalist system, and he wanted to ease relations with other countries and try and develop through trade and create more choices and options for people in the Soviet Union. But it was far too little too late, and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Soviet Union broke up into 15 new independent countries. So the Soviet Union was huge, and when it collapsed, all those areas became their own countries, and it was 15 new countries. One of those 15 new countries was Russia. Okay, so yeah, so 15 new independent countries. So their culture, language, and religion, it's Russian. They speak Russian. It's Indo-European. They're Orthodox Christianity, so they're Eastern Orthodox or sometimes called Russian Orthodox. Education and healthcare, they have a nearly 100% literacy rate, and the government provides healthcare. Um, yeah. Art, so classical music was sort of kind of invented in Russia. They call them like postmodern composers, but Tchaikovsky and Stravinsky, they're both composers that you've heard pieces of music from. I'm gonna embarrass myself, but you know that song they always play around 4th of July in the United States? It's a song that goes do 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 and like they're always like shooting fireworks and it's like bang, yeah, that's Tchaikovsky. He composed that. So it's not even an American song. It was invented by some Russian guy in the Soviet Union, but we use it in the United States. Like, I know it was on like commercials and stuff around 4th of July. Also the Nutcracker, so ballet is very popular in Russia. It's a big deal. And Tchaikovsky also composes the Nutcracker. So the music in the Nutcracker, he made that music as well. And you've heard that too, like around Christmas time. Sports and leisure. So basketball is very popular in Russia. Hockey is like life there. They have fantastic hockey players. They have their own professional hockey league. It's called the KHL, Continental Hockey League. Um, and it's like the second largest professional league behind the NHL. And then soccer or football is very important there as well. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for watching.